Hey there, welcome back to another week of Leading from the Middle. I'm Helen Young-McLaughlin. I might sound a little bit different this week because I'm getting over being sick, but I'm so excited to continue my conversations. And this week is no different. And just to do a quick recap, I have chosen this year to connect with 23 different leaders to learn a little bit more about what they believe companies can do to transform their middle managers into their most valuable asset. And I simply do this by asking one question, which I'm loving. And this week, I'm super excited to introduce you to Marcy Stoudt. She is the CEO of Revel Companies. And I just want to pause here and say, welcome, Marcy. Thank you so much for being here.
Helen, this is great conversation. So I'm honored to be here and thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. Marcy, will you share with our listeners a little bit about the work you've done and are currently doing that kind of leads into the conversation we're going to be having today?
Well, Revel Companies, we have two basic divisions. One is an executive search, helping to hire executives that companies need. But the other part, which is relevant for this conversation, is Revel Coach. And our Revel Coach business, we focus on three core problems that we solve. The first is anything tied to revenue. So growing a company, whether that's at the C-suite or a CRO. The second is the people plan. So really around culture and things like that. And then the third is dealing with burnout. So we built an entire company around solving those three business challenges, and life in the middle, that middle man is probably the most important role to make these three things have a good plan to move forward with the right people.
Well, I love those three pillars too, because they're so essential and so interconnected. And Marcy, you oversee about 17 people in your company right now. Is that right? You got a growing team. That's awesome. And I know that you've been in the corporate space for many, many years and prior to starting your own business. And am I right that you were the first VP of Allegis Group? It's pretty
Yes.
impressive.
Or female. No, first female vice
First
president.
female, sorry, first female. Yes. And that's pretty impressive. That's awesome. Because you oversaw, was it a team of 300, I think?
Yeah. Yeah. So my
Yeah.
first promotion, I was about 30 years old and got promoted to run a large sales team. And it was 350 people in my organization. And at the time, when this happened, it was about 20 years ago. It just was really growing. And when I first started right out of college, I was one of the only females in my office. My best friend who referred me, she was the only female in her office. So it was a natural progression. But it kind of getting that opportunity to lead as the only female vice president really kind of fueled my passion around this space of helping people be, authentic to who they are, knowing the company that they work for. There's certain expectations and cultural expectations that look good, kind of
Right.
behavior, but that authentic self is really what they care most about. And so I had to learn that early on, being the only female working with a bunch of guys. But it really, it transforms into and translates into today's day and age where, the diversity in terms of gender is pretty strong. And
Yeah.
but still, knowing how to navigate leadership based on your style, but also adapting it to other people is what I learned early on in my career from that experience.
And for you, so you have a wealth of knowledge, right? You have the corporate sector, you've started your own company and not just one part of the company, but you just launched another part of another company. And so I'm so excited to ask you this question because I think the listeners are really going to be able to gain some good insight from your expertise and experience. And, we can all look back and be like, ooh, I always say, God, I wish I had a coach back then, right? I wish I had my own coach back then. But the question I'm asking everybody is, what is one thing that companies need to pay closer attention to when it comes to developing their managers?
I love this question, and it really makes you think differently because when you say one thing, you got to
Right.
really work about that one thing. And really, to me, managers, their main responsibility is creating an environment where their people thrive. And that's the nut. Like that's all, that's all that it needs to do is kind of creating that one environment. and it's who you impact on your team. And those middle managers have a lot of influence. So if they're tasked with creating environments where the middle manager is thriving, so then that way they can kind of create a team that's thriving. That's the one thing. How to do it? That's
Yeah,
where
right. That's the big question. Like the HOW is, people love tips. They love the steps. How do you get started? That is really a key.
Yeah. So I narrowed it down to 3 items. So the first and foremost is if you were starting a company or growing a company, you get to a point where you think, oh my goodness, we really need to add this role. We really need this person, this thing. And
Right.
that is so important because, it's going to solve a big problem. It's going to help you drive. And then you hire the right person for it. So in this first step, you're managing a team, and that decision was made 10 years ago, 20 years ago, maybe by some of you don't even know. But at the heart of the matter, the person on your team has got to believe what they do matters. They got to know the work, and it contributes to the company's success, to the team's success, and they're very capable of doing it. So the
Yeah.
first how out of my 3 hows is, as a manager, making sure what they know what they do matters, and it's going to make they're good at it.
I like that. It matters and they're going to be good at it. That means that they have to really understand it too. Because I've
Wow.
also talked to people where they've been promoted, and they're not really sure. They're sort of figuring it out. They're not really sure exactly the expectations of the role because the role might be changing along the way. Have you
Yeah.
encountered that?
Oh, absolutely. And that's one thing that causes a lot of stress because after a
Yeah.
while people get confused. If somebody's really overwhelmed in my world, I just like, all right, let's just time out. What do you get paid to do?
Break it
And it
down.
just brings some clarity, like
Right.
it's nice to have what's absolutely, I need to do this. And then are they doing the above and beyond things around what they get paid to do? It kind of brings
hmm
sense of it because when roles shift, you often don't drop things from your calendar.
Yeah.
You just add.
Add.
And that's a good, like, that's kind of a, you know, point to the North Star. Like, that's a good way of kind of like, just answer that question. And then are you
Yeah.
doing everything great around that question?
I like
So
that. I like that. Okay. So number 2, we got
number 2,
one is around the role and it needs to matter. Like they need to understand it, it needs to matter. And there needs to be clarity around it.
yeah. So the second is recognizing where your team is, where a person is. So if you're managing somebody, if you're leading somebody that's in middle management, I'll speak to that role. But if
Yeah.
you're in management, this is what you need to do for your people. But we've narrowed it down. So under stress or under frustration or under overwhelm, people don't behave the way they actually want to behave. Like they
hmm
act versus, do what they need to do. So for some people, when they're not in a good spot, it might sound like procrastination, it might sound like complaining, it might sound like blame. Like they basically just sound they're in like a victim loop, and everything they
Yeah.
talk about, that's impossible. So recognizing where they are, Rebel Coach, we've decided like, let's just keep it simple. Draw a center line, and you're either above center or below center. So if
Okay.
you're center, you're thriving, you're challenging, you have a growth mindset, even when like a bad thing happens, like a client is really disappointed in you, kind of blows up at you. If you're above center, you're like, how do I learn from this? What can we do better? Let's kind of
Mhm.
overserve this person. But if that client explodes on you and you're below center, your
Right.
hands in the air, like, I don't even know, like frustration and things like
Right.
that. So your role as a manager is not to judge their current behaviors and the reactions, but to really understand where they are in terms of a mindset, above center,
Mhm.
below. The third, I guess I'll roll right into it. But the
Well,
third is,
I want to pause for a second because I
yeah.
love the words you just said at the end, the mindset.
Mhm.
Right? We're going to have a bad day. We're going to have an off week at times. We're not talking about that, I don't think. We're talking about consistency over time in how we navigate I'll call it the emotional intelligence, but how we respond to an event, to some news, to something going sideways. And I like that simplicity of above center, below center. And being able, if I'm a manager, am I able to pick up on what my team member might be, experiencing?
Yeah.
And part of that is then asking some of those questions, right?
Yeah.
Asking those important questions, which is, what would a question be if you notice that somebody is sort of getting derailed, they're getting super frustrated, they're feeling a little more cynical? What might a really good question a manager can ask that person?
Right. So that's kind of going to the third because
Oh,
everybody's different. So if this were me and it happened to me, what I like is somebody being like, time out, you all right? You want to go for a walk real quick? Like let's kind of talk. Like I feel energized with people and I feel
mhm.
energized when people know me and I like true connections. I
Yeah,
love side that gives me fresh perspective. So if I'm really stressed, like with my kids and they know me now well,
right.
they'll be like, Mom, feel like you're about to freak out. And they kind of make me laugh. And then it just kind of it makes it a little bit lighter. We can through, like banter, we can go through. But somebody else could be totally different. So
Yeah,
there's no magic pill. The magic is knowing what works for everybody. But I was gonna say on like the above center, below center, like sometimes it's nothing to do with what is at hand. They're reacting
hmm,
over else. So just say traffic, for instance. Somebody's feeling really awesome. They're going to a client meeting and they're really excited. Traffic happens. Okay.
right.
Traffic happens. If they're not thinking correctly and they don't have a good plan on how to stay above center, they'll do the innocent mistake. Text the client, so sorry, running about 5 minutes late. Traffic's bad. Well, now
Yeah,
you show up and you're 7 minutes late. Now you're late a second time. So that time, the 10 minutes in the traffic, you're like,
right,
late. I'm now more late. You're below center having this mantra below center, like, oh, I hate the traffic. Nobody can drive here.
right,
Show up and energy is contagious. You show up below center and what do? You start complaining, victim loop about the traffic. In your 30-minute client meeting that now they've graciously given you 45 minutes because you were late.
right.
You spend 15 minutes complaining about the traffic and everybody wants to pile on about bad traffic. And then you have the meeting and you're all below center and you're like, okay. Versus if you have a discipline to stay above center, your first thing is when you're late, you say, I'm going to be about 15 minutes late. Because
Right.
then you're early to the next meeting. And when you show up, you don't talk about what's below center. You talk about really the purpose. You say, I'm so appreciative for you guys waiting. There's nothing more important than this conversation. Thank you for waiting. Let's get started. And now
I
everyone's
love this. I love this because so many of the managers that I work with, need a little bit of encouragement around how do I approach a situation like that? Because many of them are either emerging or might be a current manager, but maybe they're just navigating different conversations that they hadn't, had to do in their previous roles. And just hearing something like what you just described, that helps move it forward. It does go back to mindset. I believe that the importance of being able to shift your mind to say, okay, how do I want to navigate this instead of getting caught up, which we all do at times, getting caught up in the emotional hijack.
very true. Very true.
And so that example was gold right there. I'm curious to hear what the listeners are going to say.
Well, and one of my mentors, and I always still laugh about this, but he always used to say the complaint department's closed. And then he wanted to buy a shirt that would say, when you got somebody on your team that's complaining, always below center, they're complaining, they're just reminding you of how hard their life is or how busy they are, or how overwhelmed they are. And he's like, I wanted just a t-shirt that says, nobody cares, work harder. Complaining, we're all busy, so
Right.
that's something that, you really want to be intentional with your mindset. If you only have 20 minutes with somebody, what do you want the content to be? Do you want it to be above center? You want it to be around like the good that's happening and the potential of,
Right.
or the bad that's happening and how crappy it is, and you kind of stay stuck. So
And if
depending,
you are stuck, to be able to say, I'm feeling stuck. Or
yeah,
as a manager, this comes with time and practice to be able to say, I notice you seem a little stuck in this space. Let's talk about what might help you get unstuck.
absolutely, absolutely. It's
And it's small conversations like that, I think, Marcy, that really help people not, you don't want to sidestep it, you don't want to avoid it. And it's at the end of the day, I always say it's around the communication and the relationship that you can build so that you can get to the place where you ultimately want to be, which is thrive. You know, people want to thrive. They want to feel like they're getting things done. They don't want to feel like, you know, they're stuck. And part of that, I think, for me, I talk about the pause, the power of the pause. Like, what's my intention for this next meeting that I'm going to have? How do I want to show up, especially when I'm feeling a little off today? Um, and and so that's when you said, "Oh, do you want me to go on to the third?" I had to kind of stop. I was like, "No, no, no. Mindset is huge."
That's
And
wonderful.
people, I don't know about for you, but I think there's a lot of people that don't consider it to be as maybe important as I think it really is. But I could go into the neuroscience of it because that stuff just excites the heck out of me. But the research does show, right? If we can get our mindset in a certain place, if we can have these practices and these intentions, it makes a tremendous difference.
Yeah.
In productivity, in confidence, in profitability for companies. So I don't know if you have any thoughts around that. I'd love to hear.
Well, this is where the third step comes in. And I
Okay.
feel like this is the most complex part, but it actually gets a lot easier if you're truly committed to this, then it'll work.
Okay.
But to know that every person is different. So how
Mhm.
one person gets unstuck versus another is totally different.
Yeah.
So one of my greatest lessons learned from like doing, becoming a full-time coach, every day I'm having these types of conversations above center, below center. But when I
Right.
was back at Allegis Group, I'm managing a large team. A lot of salespeople, kind of do the DISC assessment, basically. If you
Hmm.
know, a lot of salespeople are in this enthusiastic, believe in like the positivity, and they'll cast big pictures, and then everybody they're like, all right, let's go. And you run for the positivity.
Right.
So in that, I was kind of asked to drive a bus, put the right people on the bus. And when I drive, like I'd get the masses to jump on my bus. And then there'd be a handful of people outside of my bus and they'd have questions, questions, questions. And they were negative to me. I'm like, oh my God, like we'll figure it out. Like, get on the bus, get on the bus.
Right.
Eventually, I drive away, like I was the boss and I couldn't get them on board and they were so
Hmm.
negative that I would drive away. And so that is the mistake that you make when you think your way of getting somebody unstuck is the way to do it. So people, if you follow DISC as for the example here, people that are maybe like the C's, the only way they get unstuck is through more information.
Yeah.
They need clarity, they need specifics, they need black and white. So if hindsight 2020,
Right.
if I had been talented at this, like creating an environment people thrive, I actually would have recognized that the questions they were asking, like, where are we going? Do we need an overnight bag? Do you have a spare tire? Do we need to pack? They were asking survival questions.
Yes.
Instead of being the bus driver that drives away and painting them in a corner as negative, I could have partnered with them, have an assigned seat on the bus. So now taking it to the real world, not the bus, but
Right.
meetings, that person that's negative, they're not actually, when they're above center, they're going to have those questions. When
Right.
you are below center, those questions sound like they're questioning your authority. When you're above center, you're like, thank you. I didn't even think about that. So the adjustment, like as a manager, creating a place where people thrive, if you think about that first one, it's like you've got to create an environment like what they do matters. So if you hired somebody that has that type of analytical skills, you assign a seat on the bus and you say, I need somebody that's got my back. Ask me the questions I'm not thinking of, what information you need. So then repeat that scenario. I'm seeing negative people at my door. That one guy, he rolls down the window and he says, I've asked her all the questions. Sit next to me. I'll give you all the answers. We're good. Let's go. And what you do is you create this team where diversity of thought and decision
Yes.
making, people thrive because they understand what they do matters. You're accountable to keeping people above center, but you're not generically saying, hey, you should be happy. You should be, you work,
Right.
you should work longer, you should work shorter. Like the recommendation of advice from managers tends to be on what works for them. But if you just turn it around, to coaching them on how they look at themselves and hold themselves accountable to it, and just creating that environment, people respect that level of executive function and decision making.
Yes,
And
this
they
is so good. I use the disc too in my program, the Leverage Academy. And what I love about it, Marcy, is the managers that I work with, they really get an understanding of like, oh, so this is what irritates me. And these are strengths of mine. They may come across as this, and the agility, helping them learn the, ways to navigate conversations with other styles that may be different from them, and also for them to stretch into some of those styles so that they can be more flexible and agile in the roles that they serve. So I love that you brought up DISC, because I think it's a fantastic assessment and tool for really managers and leaders alike to utilize inside the workplace.
Yeah, it's great. Because all that it does, like any of those tools, and I'm a believer in a lot of personality assessments, they all have these great algorithms, but it just kind of gives you peace of mind, and it gives you language to express what works for you. So in the core question of the role of managers, creating environments where people thrive, the manager that thinks they have the solution for everybody is going to be burned out quickly. But if you create this, again, like if it's a DISC or whatever you use for your personality assessment or for like your awareness, teaching people, hey, before I go in this meeting, I'd like to ask a few questions in private. So I partner with you and you're not uncomfortable with me asking those questions. Getting that person to find their voice is the environment that thrives. The manager going to every single person is going to be exhausted. So that's the, between those three, they got to know what they do matters. They got to recognize where you are, and then figuring out a way to get above center in a way that works for them. That is, intertwined in how the team operates.
You summarized that so well. Thank you so much. That's really going to be helpful for those listening in. So Marcy, thank you for being a part of this project. I appreciate it so much. If people want to learn more about you and connect with you, where can they go?
So revelcoach.com, REV. I have a daughter at Ole Miss, and now people think it's Rebel.
Okay.
Revelcoach.com is the right place. And from there, it can take you to the revelsearch.com website as well, if you're interested in our executive search.
Okay, great. And you're also on LinkedIn.
I'm also on LinkedIn. Yep. Marcy Stoudt.
If anybody wants to look you up on LinkedIn, they can do that. And just want to say thank you again to Marcy for being here.
Thank you so much for joining us and tuning in to another interview of Leading from the Middle. I'm really looking forward to hearing some feedback from you. I want to connect with you. You can connect with me directly on LinkedIn at Helen Young-McLaughlin. Just hit that hyphen in between Young and McLaughlin, or you can go to my website at helenyoungcoaching.com. Thanks again, and have a great day.